But what I want to cover now is the identity of Arabs generally and Palestinians in particular, because I think it's really important to understand the current events that are happening today from a historical point of view, as well as a biblical point of view. So we know that there are Arab Christians, and we praise the Lord for them, and we need to keep them in prayer because they are often at the front line of this battle. But I want to say that there is a stolen identity. I believe the Lord gave me these words, stolen identity, and I've even got the word fake identity and misappropriation of identity. And you might be thinking, what on earth is she talking about, good heavens? All right, so let me just say that if we have a look at what's happening at the moment is that a lot of Arab people are seeing themselves as being colonised, as being victims, when in fact through most of history they have been the colonisers. And I think it's just so very important to understand that. And I'll probably share more about that in future, but I just want to flag it now. So when Israel reformed or became the modern state of Israel in 1948, what was happening was decolonisation. The charge against Israel at the moment is that they're a colonial, settler, occupier, apartheid, racist state. And I'm specifically looking at the colonising part of it at the moment. Israel actually decolonised its state in 1948 when it became independent on the 15th of May. Before that, it had been under the British mandate, and the Jewish people saw the British as colonisers. Before that, 400 years of Turkish Ottoman rule, and before that, and before that, and before that, and before that. I won't go into all of them now, I have done before, but Israel would have to be the most colonised nation, the Jewish people, the most colonised people group in history. So for them to face the charge now that they are the colonisers is actually so ridiculous, so anti-historical, such a misinformation. You know, these days they like to say misinformation, disinformation, that's the latest thing. Well, fake news. Well, this certainly is. Calling good evil and evil good, as the Bible says. But the thing is, you know, most, and Jewish people are indigenous to Israel, but many indigenous people around the world have tried to decolonise. Israel successfully decolonised, and yet it's not recognised. Anyhow, we'll leave it at that. So look, there is hurt and anger on behalf of Arab peoples because they feel like they're the victim. They feel like it's an issue of injustice. And so you have a lot of Western, and I believe that's a false identity. I believe that's a stolen identity to be seeing themselves as colonised peoples. And there's more to it. But you have around the West today, and we've seen it in university streets everywhere, you have Westerners who have a sense of social justice. They want to do the right thing, and so they're believing the narrative that the Palestinian people have been colonised by Israel and thrown out of their rightful land. And so while you see wild scenes on our streets, many of them generally think that they're doing the right thing. I mean, this is the latest cause of some perpetual protesters, but many of them think they're doing the right thing. And many of the Palestinians who've been brought up in their education system think that they're doing the right thing as well. This false narrative is actually very pervasive and causing a lot of issues, but I think it needs to be called out for what it is, and that's basically what I'm doing today. And so another interesting thing which many people are not aware of, that many of the people who call themselves Arabs today are not ethnically Arab. They are culturally and linguistically Arab. Well, why would that be? Because they've been colonised over centuries. And without going into too much detail on that, when we were organising our Sons of Abraham conference to bring Jews and Arabs together in Sydney in 2015, a lot of people who I thought were Arab said, no, we're not Arabs. We like Arab food and we know some Arabic, but our lands were colonised by Arabs. These were people who were Egyptians or Lebanese or etc. So that was the first time I got exposed to that kind of information, but it certainly is borne out by research as well. And so what I'm saying here is that they have picked up that victimhood ideology along with the culture. Okay? So it's fine if they want to identify as Arabs when they're not ethnically Arab, that's totally up to them. I mean, these days you can identify as anything, can't you? But that's another story. It's up to people. If they want to identify as Arabs, that's fine. But to take on a false victimhood, that's another thing that I have difficulty with. Okay. The other thing is some Arabs say they're descendants of the Canaanites. Now you know that before, so when Abraham moved from Ur of the Chaldees into what is now Israel, we know it was called Canaan at that time, and they were a Semitic people. They no longer exist. They went out of existence about 1600 years ago. But when Abraham moved in there, as I said, the current Arabs are definitely not related to the Canaanites, and the Palestinians are definitely not related to the Philistines. So I'm going to say a bit more about that as well. But that's a fairly key assertion to try to establish their claim to the land that we currently know as Israel and is also ancient Israel. All right. So obviously there were ethnic Arabs in the land of Israel because it was conquered by Arab Muslims in 638 AD. And also when we had Jewish people moving back there, because there's always been Jewish people living in Israel, and after the 1890s there were movements back to rebuild Israel by the Jewish people, a stronger movement, and then many Arabs moved there from places like Saudi Arabia, etc., because they saw economic opportunities as the land was becoming rebuilt. So the question we really need to ask ourselves, does having a long history as colonisers and occupiers of a land give Arabs the right to call themselves Indigenous to Israel? It's worth looking at that question, okay? I don't think it does. I think when you look at it, you have Abraham came about 4,000 years ago. King David ruled Israel about 3,000 years ago. And then you have the Arab Muslims came about 1,300 years ago. So it is a long time, historically. So there would be some rights, I would say, attached to long residence in a land, okay? But that's not the same as being Indigenous, okay? Also, Israel doesn't have a problem with Arab people living in Israel. There are 2.2 million Arabs living in Israel. The numbers have been increasing since 1948, not decreasing. So charges of genocide are totally unreal. And to say that Israel is an apartheid state is simply not true, because they are in all professions. They are in the government or Knesset. As MKs, they are lawyers, they are most of the professions have Arab people in there, lawyers, doctors, etc. Okay. So when we're talking, I want to just make clear again, when we're talking about a stolen identity, I'm not talking about Arabized people claiming to be Arabs. As I said, that's fine. What I'm talking about is the false victim narrative. Basically identifying with the ideology of the Arabs, that the land was stolen from them, their inheritance stolen from them, with regard to what happened with Isaac and Ishmael, and what happened with Jacob and Esau. Okay, so I wanted to make that clear. So specifically talking about the Palestinians, they're not related ethnically to the Canaanites, and not even to the Philistines. So it's interesting that the Philistines were actually Greek people, and they came from the Aegean Sea area, from Crete, and some of the Greek isles. They were actually sea people. They were invaders, and they invaded the area now known as the Gaza Strip and took over the land from the Canaanite people. They did eventually intermingle with them. And but the Philistines no longer exist. And I often wondered why, and I did a little bit more research and found what I didn't realise before is when the Babylonians came and conquered the people of Judah or Judea and took them off to Babylon, they also conquered the Philistine people and sent them into exile as well. The difference with the Philistines is that they intermingled with the people that they, whose lands they went into, and they lost their ethnic identity and they disappeared from history in the 6th century. So it's worth knowing that. So the Palestinians today cannot say that they are descendants of the Philistines, because the Philistines had Greek heritage and they have not existed as a people for a long time. Obviously, the people of Greece still exist. Okay, so the other thing that is worth noting is that there was never a Palestinian people or country right through history. And it's really important to state that, I believe. Now, the other thing is the Palestinian people is a fairly recent term. And you might say, well, hang on, I thought it was a term used a long time ago. Well, what actually happened is that in 135 AD, there was a Jewish uprising against the Romans. The Romans defeated the Jewish people and they decided they wanted to remove any connection of the Jewish people to the land. So they called it after the ancient enemies of Israel, the Philistines, and called it Syria Palestina. And so that name then existed over that area until 638 AD, when the Arab Muslims conquered Jerusalem. They also conquered the Romans at that time. And so the term Palestina or Palestine didn't get used again for nearly 2,000 years, well, officially anyway, until we had the World War I and we had the League of Nations looking at what to do with the territories that had been part of the Turkish Ottoman Empire, which had lost the war to the Allies. And so in 1922, the League of Nations gave the British mandate of Palestine, they called it. They called it the British Mandate of Palestine to the British over the area that is now called Israel, and it also included the Gaza Strip, and Judea and Samaria and Jordan. So it's worth knowing that. All right. And so what happened in 1923 is that the British decided to recognise Jordan as an emirate, and so Israel lost a lot of land that could have been part of the state of Israel. And we know that what happened then in 1948 was that when Israel declared itself as a modern state of Israel after the British mandate finished. By the way, I should just backtrack just a little bit and say that toward the end of the British mandate in 1947, they said to the UN, which replaced the League of Nations, we want to stop having the British mandate over this area because the Jews and Arabs were fighting too much, causing problems. And so basically the UN said, okay. They set up a petition plan, Resolution 181 of the United Nations, to petition the British mandate of Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state, the Jews accepted it, even though it meant they would lose some land. The Arab people didn't accept it, and so when Israel became independent, there was no Arab state. Now, note that it wasn't, the UN didn't decide to petition it to a Jewish state and a Palestinian state, because at that time the Arab people weren't calling themselves Palestinians. It was a Jewish state and an Arab state. And so, when Israel became a state in 1948, what happened then was these Arab nations attacked it, and the Arab nations said to the Arab people living in Israel, get out, because we're going to come in and conquer it. You'll be in the way, get out the way, you can come back in 2 weeks' time when we win the war. Well, a lot of Arab people did go, and these are the ones that are called refugees today. Some stayed and prospered, but a lot went, and these are the ones that are talking about a right of return, and for them and all their descendants. And so, what's often not recognised is pretty much the same number of Jewish people were thrown out of Arab lands in the Middle East at the same time, but they were absorbed into Israel, but the Arab states refused to absorb the Palestinians, and they wanted just to keep that as a thorn in the side of Israel, which it still is today, as you would know. Okay. I've got a little bit more, so just bear with me a little bit longer. I hope this is not too long for you. But it's worth knowing that in 1937, a local Arab leader told the Palestine Royal Commission, quote, "There is no such country as Palestine. Palestine is a term the Zionists invented. Our country for centuries was part of Syria." Arab historian Philip Hitti echoed the sentiment shortly before Israel declared independence, saying, "There is no such thing as Palestine in history, absolutely not." End of quote. So, what the watershed moment for the Palestinian national movement came after the 1967 Six-Day War, when Israel won control of Judea and Samaria from Jordan. Now, why was there a war? The Arab states attacked Israel again. It defended itself, and it gained territory in rapid time, 6 days. So, the words of author Walid Shobat of Bethlehem sum up the profound shift in Arab identity. And here we have that word identity again, profound shift in Arab identity. Quote, "On June 4, 1967, I was a Jordanian, and overnight I became a Palestinian." And just on a personal note there, we Norman and I and our church hosted a Sons of Abraham conference in Jerusalem in 2017, bringing Jews and Arabs together. And we had a Palestinian pastor who shared, and he said that he was pro-Israel, as it turned out. He had a Jordanian passport, and and he still had one, even though he was living in Israel, and that was sometimes an issue for him. We know other Arab pastors in, say for example, one in Bethlehem, and he calls himself Palestinian. Ethnically, he's not really an Arab, but that's he's living in what's called the Palestinian territories, and so he's taken on the identity of a Palestinian. He happens to be pro-Israel as well. So in 2018, the Palestinian Authority Chief Mahmoud Abbas told the United Nations Security Council, quote, "We are descendants of the Canaanites that lived in the land 5,000 years ago and continued to live there to this day." End of quote. Simply untrue. Most Palestinians trace their origins to prominent tribes in Saudi Arabia, Syria, Iraq, Yemen and Egypt. Even Yasser Arafat himself, head of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, was born in Egypt. So Abbas also called Jesus a Palestinian, and you've probably heard that said. He simply was not a Palestinian. Palestine did not exist. He was living in Judea under Roman occupation at that time. And so we have all these false narratives operating. So just to end here with on this issue, in 2000, and the other thing that happened in 1967 war is that Gaza came from Egypt back to Israel. But in 2005, can you believe, on the 9th of Av, which is the most tragic day on the Hebrew calendar, is when Israel forcibly removed its settlements from Gaza in a land for peace deal. So we can see how much peace they've got, because when Hamas took control of Gaza, there have been missiles and jihads pretty much ever since, culminating in October 7 recently, and we know that was what that was like. Many of, and I won't go into that horrible day, which was the worst day since the Holocaust, but many of those Jewish people living near the border of Gaza, not all of them, but many were peaceniks, and they went to a lot of trouble to make peace and befriend the Gazan people, the Palestinian people, and even taking them all the way to hospital regularly in Jerusalem, waiting all day and taking them back again, and helping in any way they could. It didn't make any difference. They were slaughtered along with everybody else on October 7. So what we really need to realise is the current Israel-Hamas war has spiritual roots, and very much is based on false ideology and false, even stolen identity.